The alarm cut through the base like a blade before Grace Sullivan even opened her eyes. Red light spun across the ceiling of the barracks. Somewhere outside, something enormous was screaming, and the ground itself seemed to shake with every breath it took. Grace was on her feet before she understood why. Her boots hit the floor. Her hands found her jacket. Her mind was still catching up to her body, the way it always did in the first 3 seconds of a nightmare that turned out to be real. A voice crackled through the base speakers. Containment breach. Sector 9. All Division 7 personnel report to the Eastern Gate immediately. This is not a drill. Grace froze for half a second. Division 7. That was not her division. She was supposed to be 2 buildings over, counting crates of food rations and checking supply manifests, a desk soldier with clean boots and a quiet life. But the wristband on her arm, the one that told the base computer who she was and where she belonged, had been telling everyone for 8 months that she belonged to Division 7. The Monster Division, the unit nobody wanted to join, and almost nobody survived long enough to leave. She ran anyway. The Eastern Gate was already a storm of motion when she arrived. Soldiers were shouting orders in 3 different languages, human and otherwise. Vehicles roared past with their lights flashing, and above the tree line, past the fence, something with a long neck and a body like a crushed mountain was tearing through the perimeter wall as if it were made of paper. A tall man with silver hair and sharp eyes turned to her. His name was Owen Blake, the commanding officer of Division 7, a man who had survived longer in this unit than anyone had a right to. "You're late, Sullivan," he said, though his voice carried no real anger, only urgency. "I was never supposed to be here," she said, breathless. "Tell that to the creature outside the fence," Owen said. "Right now I need every set of hands I have." He handed her a small device, no bigger than a phone, with a screen that showed a pulsing green light. "This tracks heat and movement," he said. "You are not going to fight that thing head on. None of us can. You are going to help me figure out where it goes next." Grace looked past him, toward the gate, where the creature had just knocked over a transport vehicle like a toy. Her stomach turned. But there was no time to argue. No time to explain that she had trained for logistics, not survival, not monsters. She followed him toward the fence line, her heart hammering, her hands shaking around the small device he had given her. The creature outside the base was called a Grelic, one of the largest and most dangerous species ever recorded on this planet. It had 6 eyes, a hide thick enough to stop most weapons, and a memory long enough to hold a grudge. This one had lost its nest 3 days earlier during a routine scouting mission, and grief, in creatures like this, often turned into rage. Grace had read about the Grelic in passing, back when she still thought her job was counting boxes. She never imagined she would be standing 40 meters from one, her whole body vibrating with fear, trying to remember which direction was safest to run. Owen crouched behind a supply crate and motioned for her to do the same. "Watch its head," he said, "not its legs. Its legs will tell you where it has been. Its head will tell you where it is going." Grace forced herself to look. The Grelic swung its massive head from side to side, testing the air, testing the sound of the sirens and the shouting soldiers. Every few seconds it paused, as if listening for something specific. "It is looking for something," Grace said, almost to herself. "Not fighting for the sake of fighting. It is looking for something." Owen glanced at her, surprised. "Its nest," she said. "It already lost its nest. Now it thinks we have it, or it thinks we caused it. It is not attacking randomly. It is searching, and search patterns are not random." For a moment, Owen said nothing. Then he smiled, just slightly, the kind of smile a person allows themselves in the middle of chaos when something unexpected finally makes sense. "Keep watching," he said. "Tell me everything you see." Grace kept her eyes on the animal. She noticed it favored one side of its body, moving with a slight limp on its left. She noticed it reacted more sharply to loud, sudden noises than to quiet movement, meaning its hearing, despite its 6 eyes, might be doing more work than its vision. She noticed the pattern of its search, wide sweeping turns to the right, always circling back toward the broken section of fence where it had first entered. "It keeps returning to the same gap in the fence," she said. "It is not lost. It is guarding an exit. It thinks that gap is the way back to what it lost." Owen lifted a small radio to his mouth and spoke quickly to the rest of his team, describing the pattern Grace had noticed, giving new orders based on information that, 3 minutes earlier, nobody in Division 7 had thought to look for. They did not attack the Grelic head-on. Instead, soldiers using long-range sound devices created a series of low-frequency pulses near the far side of the base, far from the broken fence, designed to sound like distant movement. The creature turned toward the new sound, drawn by instinct, believing it might be closer to whatever it was searching for. While its attention shifted, a second team quietly sealed the broken section of fence with a temporary barrier, cutting off its planned retreat path. Confused and now trapped in an unfamiliar section of the base, the Grelic became disoriented rather than more aggressive. Its search behavior, which had been focused and determined only minutes earlier, turned into wide, uncertain circles. Grace watched from behind the crate, her fear slowly being replaced by something else, a strange, sharp focus she had never felt before. "Now," she said quietly, "it is unsure. This is when it will make a mistake." Owen looked at her again, longer this time. "How do you know that?" he asked. "I don't know," Grace admitted. "I just do." The Grelic, confused and searching for a way out, wandered into a wide ravine on the eastern edge of the base, a natural trap the terrain had created long before any of them arrived. Once inside, its size worked against it. The walls of the ravine were too steep and too narrow for it to turn quickly, and the soldiers, following Grace's read on its behavior, were able to guide it further in using controlled sound signals rather than direct confrontation. Within 20 minutes, the creature that had torn through a reinforced fence like paper was calm enough, contained enough, that a specialized team was able to approach with tranquilizing equipment designed for creatures of its size. Nobody was harmed. Nobody had to fight the Grelic directly at all. When it was finally secured, the base fell into an unfamiliar quiet. Grace realized her hands were still shaking, not from fear this time, but from the sudden release of tension that had been building since the alarm first sounded. Owen approached her as the rest of the team began the slow process of documenting the creature and preparing it for relocation. "You said you were never supposed to be here," he said. "There was an error with my file," Grace said. "Someone entered my information wrong. I was supposed to be in logistics." Owen studied her for a long moment. "Whoever made that error did this division a favor," he said. "Most soldiers here spend years learning to read the field the way you just did in 10 minutes. "I only did what made sense," Grace said. "I watched. I thought about what it wanted, not just what it could do." "That is the entire job," Owen said. "Most people never learn it. They watch the claws. The people who survive out here learn to watch the mind." Grace looked past him, toward the ravine where the Grelic now lay peacefully, its rage replaced by exhausted stillness. She should have filed a correction that same day. The paperwork to fix the error in her file was sitting on a desk, 2 buildings over, waiting for a signature. She never signed it. 3 weeks later, Division 7 was sent to the southern ridge, a rocky, wind-battered stretch of land where a different kind of creature had been reported, smaller than the Grelic, but far more numerous, and far more difficult to predict. These creatures were called Skarn, fast-moving pack hunters that worked together with an intelligence that made them more dangerous than almost anything else in the region. A single Skarn was manageable. A pack of them, moving in coordinated patterns, had ended entire missions in minutes. Grace stood at the edge of the ridge with the rest of her team, now 6 soldiers total, human and otherwise, all of them watching the tree line below for any sign of movement. Beside her stood Lily Adams, a quiet, sharp-eyed soldier who had transferred into the division only a month earlier, and Marcus Fenwick, a broad-shouldered man with a booming laugh that seemed strangely out of place in a division known for its short survival rate. "You've only been here 3 weeks, and Owen already treats you like second in command," Marcus said, only half joking. "Careful. People get jealous around here." "I did not ask for that," Grace said. "Doesn't matter what you asked for," Lily said, adjusting the strap on her equipment. "Out here, results speak louder than requests." The tree line below shifted, subtle at first, then unmistakable. Shapes moved between the trunks, low and fast, more of them than Grace could count at a glance. "Pack of at least 12, Owen said through the radio, watching from a higher position. Everyone hold formation. Sullivan, tell me what you see. Grace focused on the movement below, forcing herself to slow her breathing the way she had learned over the past 3 weeks. She noticed the scarn were not moving in a straight line toward the ridge. They were spreading out, some circling wide to the left, others staying close to the center, a small group breaking off entirely toward the right. They are flanking, Grace said, not charging straight in, splitting into 3 groups. They want to surround us before we even notice we are surrounded. How do we stop that? Marcus asked, his usual humor gone from his voice. Grace studied the terrain for a moment, tracing the natural lines of the ridge with her eyes, the narrow paths, the open spaces, the places where 6 soldiers might be forced into a position with no escape. We don't let them choose the ground, she said. We move first. There is a narrow passage between those 2 large rocks below. If we pull back to that point, they can only come at us from one direction instead of 3. Owen's voice came through the radio again, calm and steady. Do it, he said. Sullivan is right. Fall back to the rock passage, now. The team moved quickly, repositioning before the scarn packs had fully closed their circle. By the time the creatures reached the ridge, they found their prey no longer spread out and vulnerable, but gathered in a narrow passage where only 2 or 3 could approach at once. The fight that followed was fast and tense, but far more controlled than it would have been in open ground. The team worked together, covering the narrow entrance, using the terrain itself as a shield. Grace stayed near the center, calling out warnings as she noticed shifts in the pack's movement, subtle changes in their approach that hinted at what they might try next. Watch the left side, she called out at one point. They are testing our formation before they commit. The real push will come from the right. Seconds later, the largest group of scarn shifted direction exactly as she predicted, surging from the right side of the passage. Because the team had already adjusted their positions based on her warning, the attack was met with a defense that held firm, and the pack, unable to break through or surround them, eventually retreated back toward the tree line. When the last of the creatures disappeared into the forest, the team stood in stunned, exhausted silence for a long moment before anyone spoke. That's twice now, Lily said, catching her breath. Twice she has read them before they moved. It is not reading minds, Grace said, still watching the tree line in case the pack decided to return. It is patterns. Every living thing follows patterns, even when it thinks it is being unpredictable. You just have to watch long enough to see them. Owen approached from his position on the higher ground, his expression unreadable as he looked at Grace. 6 years I have led this division, he said. I have seen soldiers with more combat training than you will ever have. I have seen soldiers stronger, faster, better armed. None of them saw the field the way you do. I still don't know why I can, Grace admitted. I never trained for this. I trained to count supplies and manage inventory lists. Maybe that is exactly why, Owen said. You never learned to think like a soldier who trusts strength first. You learned to think like someone solving a problem, patiently, one detail at a time. Out here, that turns out to matter more than anyone expected. News of the ridge encounter spread through the base faster than Grace expected. Soldiers she had never spoken to began greeting her by name in the hallways. Officers from other divisions began asking Owen, half joking and half serious, whether Division 7 would be willing to trade personnel. Grace found the attention uncomfortable at first. She had spent months believing she did not belong in this division, that her presence there was nothing more than a clerical mistake waiting to be corrected. Now, soldiers who had survived years in the field were asking for her opinion on missions before they even left the base. 4 months after the incident on the ridge, the correction to her file finally reached the top of someone's desk. A young officer she had never met called her into a small office near the administration building, holding a printed form with her name at the top. Private Sullivan, he said, reading from the file. It appears there was an error in your original assignment. Your listed role was logistics support. Somehow, your file was merged with an incorrect classification, resulting in your placement in Division 7. I can process the correction today, if you would like to be reassigned to your original post. Grace looked at the form for a long moment. She thought about the desk waiting for her 2 buildings over. The quiet, predictable life she had once expected, counting crates, checking numbers, safe behind walls that never shook from the footsteps of something enormous outside. Then she thought about the ridge, the narrow rock passage, the moment she had called out a warning and watched 6 soldiers survive because of it. She thought about the Grelic, calm and contained in the ravine, alive because nobody had needed to fight it directly. She thought about Owen's voice, steady and certain, telling her that what she saw in the field mattered more than anyone had expected. "I would like to stay in Division 7, she said. The officer glanced up, surprised. "Division 7 has one of the highest risk ratings of any unit in the region," he said, almost as a warning. "Are you certain?" "I am certain," Grace said. He hesitated, then stamped the form with a single word, "Confirmed," and slid it into a folder that would sit in an archive somewhere, a quiet record of a choice most people would have considered unwise. A year later, new soldiers arriving at the base often heard stories about Division 7 before they ever saw it for themselves. They heard about a soldier who had been placed there by mistake, who had never trained for combat, who had somehow become the person every other soldier in the unit trusted most when the field grew unpredictable and dangerous. They still called it the Monster Division, the way they always had, a nickname born from fear and the low survival rate that had defined the unit for years before Grace arrived. But those who served alongside her began to understand the name differently over time. It was never really about the size of the creatures they faced, or the danger of the missions they were sent on. It was about learning to see beyond the surface of a threat, to notice the details others missed, the patterns hidden beneath chaos, the quiet signs that revealed what something wanted before it revealed what it could do. Grace never became the strongest soldier in Division 7. She never carried the heaviest weapon or led the most direct assault. But somewhere along the narrow ridges and broken fences of a job she had never asked for, she became something the unit had never had before. Someone who could look at the most dangerous thing in the room and understand it, not just fear it. And in a division built entirely around surviving the unpredictable, that understanding turned out to be the rarest weapon of all.